Welcome to episode 52 of Let's Talk Bitcoin for October 22nd, 2013. Visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com for our daily guest blog, all our past episodes, and of course, tipping addresses. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today's show is about expectations. The Silk Road is dead. Long live the Silk Road. I'm joined by the other hosts of LTB to catch up on the apparent demise of one of Bitcoin's earliest economic milestones, what we know, and probably more importantly, what we don't know, and what it means in the big picture. Then, we head back to Georgia for a long interview with Becky and Austin Craig, the Utah-based newlyweds who have been living in the future and using only Bitcoin for the first 3 months of their marriage. We caught up with them 2 months into their experiments in what was one of the more surprising interviews of our trip. But first, BitInstant's got a problem, a legal problem. Ever since they got legal as a money transmitter, they can't find a bank willing to do business with them. I want to know what's up with this counterintuitive situation. Stephanie and Andreas help set me straight. Enjoy the show. I was in Atlanta for the cryptocurrency conference put on by Jeffrey Tucker, and on the panel that I moderated, and I say moderated only in the loosest sense of the word because mostly the panelists moderated themselves. I moderated quote unquote a panel with Tony Gallippi and Stephen Pear from BitPay and Charlie Shrem from BitInstant. Before we went up to talk about this, I was having a conversation with Charlie because BitInstant was like the de facto way to buy Bitcoin without going through an exchange, without having to have all the headache of setting all that stuff up. And I successfully used it, I think, twice. About 3 months ago, they went down because they determined they were out of compliance and that if they didn't shut down right away, then it was going to be a real problem for them because they just had all this investment and were looking to expand on their systems. 3 months passed, and what should have taken a week or two, they're still down from. So I asked him what happened in this situation, and he told me that as soon as they had jumped through all of the regulatory hoops to get licensed, and they partnered with money transmitters in 47 states, and then there were 3 states where it didn't require that. As soon as that had happened, then their banks all dropped them, and now for the last month, he had spent all of his time going around, and other people in his company too, they had actually had to lay off people because they didn't have anything for them to do, and he and other people within his company were going around and talking to banks out there and trying to find some bank, one bank anywhere that would give them a bank account. And this just floored me because, I mean, the whole idea here is that if these businesses are out of compliance and they are illegal businesses, so the idea to me that by bringing yourself into compliance with the existing system makes you so much of a risk that banks won't even touch you anymore.
Doesn't that defeat the purpose? It's easier to just operate illegally, right?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, so that's. I mean, I don't know if there's much of a topic here. I was floored by that. I was for sure that it was, they were having some sort of problem or something went wrong, and it was just that's it. It's just the bank.
No, I think the real topic here is to look at who writes the regulations and why they write the regulation. Twice a day feedings, a nice brush down of the automobile, a sack of oats when the automobile gets hungry. Another analogy I like is it's a bit like the cruise industry trying to regulate the newborn aviation industry because it happens to use airports that are controlled by the cruise ships. Well, we're being really reasonable, folks. All we ask is 64 lifeboats per plane. We built this beautifully compliant 50-ton plane. It's not our fault you can't fly it. This is really the game we're playing here. At the end of the day, regulations are there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to keep out the riffraff. Let's not kid ourselves. So right now, winning the regulation game essentially means postponing being kicked out of the party.
That's clearly a short-term solution, right? That's clearly, you can't operate illegally. But I mean, how can a business like BitInstant that has so many different compliance layers where they're going through Western Union, they're going through the wire transfer system, they're going through the ACH system. Is it even possible to run a business like that lacking this sort of permission?
No.
So the game is just don't do it?
The game is rigged, Adam.
Okay.
From top to bottom.
Okay.
And actually trying to be compliant, I think, is not only futile, but it's playing right into the hands of the regulators because at the end of the day, they're really interested, not directly. Most of the regulators are really, nice people trying to do the right thing and do their job. But their entire position is framed by others in such a way as to really discourage entry into the market. So they're playing this game on behalf of the banks. At the end of the day, I think it highlights something really important. Banks control access to commerce, through the control of money. That's the problem we've been trying to solve with Bitcoin. It's hardly surprising that that same problem is rearing its head in our Bitcoin businesses. Giving the opportunity to your competitors to control the flow of money will allow them to destroy your business. And banks have been doing this for millennia, and they will keep doing this until we take away control of the money.
So how does that happen in a paradigm like this? I mean, it seems like this is a real chicken egg problem, because in order to get from here to there, we need these sort of solutions. We need these sort of things that have to interface with the system. And certainly, I'm sure that there are other illegal venues that could be approached in order to make that sort of thing happen. And I think that local Bitcoins, not an illegal solution, but as a solution that routes around the existing banking system, that's all great. But ultimately, if we want to see mass adoption, it has to be easy. And this actually takes us on to a little bit of a different conversation. I got a chance to try out the Lamassu machines. I believe it was Aaron from Bitcoin Atlanta brought one to the Georgia event, and I was able to buy 0.08 Bitcoins for $10 cash, and it took me about 15 seconds. It was an incredible experience because it was so fast and so unlike any sort of experience I'd ever had purchasing Bitcoin. And actually, it was interesting because we saw people there. We offered a substantial discount. It was about 20 or 30% on items we were selling at the Let's Talk Bitcoin table if you paid with Bitcoin. So until they ran out of Bitcoin, people were actually going over and buying Bitcoin with their cash and then coming over and spending Bitcoin with us for like the 15% aggregate discount.
That's so convenient. It really should be illegal, but don't worry, just wait a bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They will, and that's the thing. Even if you could get into compliance with the regulations, which you can't because they're designed so that you won't be able to. If you manage to get into compliance with them, they'll just change them.
Yeah, you can't really get into compliance with the regulation. I think that's an important thing for people to understand. Most of these regulations are really process oriented. So that means that there is no sort of certificate or passing mark or anything like this. Actually being compliant with the regulation means implementing the regulatory process within your business in a consistent and continuous manner, and then reporting your audit results correctly. Being compliant really means trying to interpret these very, very vague and non-specific regulations that are all overlapping and contradicting, and trying to put together a process that somewhat mirrors them and avoid a lawsuit as a result. And in this particular case, that's never going to work because the lawsuits will happen. You can't really become compliant with fiat money without putting 64 lifeboats per aircraft and making a 50-ton unflyable piece of shit.
What you do is you remove a lot of the advantages, right? Because if the whole idea here is that Bitcoin is pseudonymous money, we talked about the RoboCoin kiosk. We're going to go into this topic because it's something right before we got into recording this, I was having a meeting with a couple other people who are interested in Bitcoin ATMs, because honestly, after that experience with the Bitcoin ATM, I was like, man, this, if the compliance isn't so insane that it's going to be insurmountable, then this really is the type of experience that people would use. And that's different from, like even Coinbase, we're talking about multi-week processes to set up these systems. Whereas if you have something like this available at a point of sale, it could be so easy. The Lamassu machine doesn't do any of this compliance stuff. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is identity, right? Is this idea that our current financial infrastructure in the United States, and most of the world for that matter, utilizes pull accounts, right? Where instead of me sending you money, I can authorize you to take money, but it's a taking process. So if there's an authorization to take money, that means that authorization has to be granted by a party that has the rights to do this. And if it's granted by a party that has the rights to do this, then that means you have to verify affirmatively that identity. So you have to make sure 100% that the person who is giving that authorization actually has the ability to give the authorization. So that's the fundamental disconnect between...
And that's counterparty risk. That basically just took a two-party transaction and turned it into a three-party transaction with a counterparty risk. That is the core capability that Bitcoin offers, the ability to do a two-party transaction with only two parties involved and no third-party counterparty risk. If you try to comply with that, essentially you're breaking Bitcoin and turning it into fiat money or the equivalent of fiat money. You're breaking the very characteristics that make it Bitcoin in order to satisfy those who really don't want to see Bitcoin be Bitcoin.
Is that true? I'm not convinced that's true. When we started talking about the RoboCoin kiosk and we talked about, like how it had the hand verify, and it's actually looking for veins, not at fingerprints or anything like that. And, the ID and stuff like that. Now that I've been digging into this compliance stuff, I understand why that was something that they wanted to put into these machines. When I make a purchase through Coinbase, right? Coinbase knows who I am. All that compliance stuff is dealt with. My bank account is hooked up to it. So my identity is already completely exposed there. It's not a stretch that if that's an acceptable solution, just because it makes it so much easier to actually do it, what's wrong with the solution for an ATM that does basically the same thing and is able to affirmatively establish identity if it then lets you take those funds out of the current system and into this newer system? Because the interfacing here is always going to be the problem. So long as the rule is that you must have identity associated, then cryptocurrency is flatly incompatible with that.
So that's fine. And we should really, my position on that is really simple. Cryptocurrency is fundamentally incompatible with identity-based controls and flow-based controls of money. And the solution is not to make cryptocurrency compatible with those. It's to redesign trust so that it doesn't require those and to remove the control from the central organizations. And that is not a side effect of Bitcoin. That's the damn core principle. And you can't regulate or comply when someone's asking you to give up the very core principle that makes Bitcoin Bitcoin just to play in the party.
Is that the core principle, though? I guess that's the thing that I don't know, is I don't know if that's the core principle or if the core principle is frictionless, easy transactions that function anywhere on the internet-connected world. I would argue that you could say both of them are.
We already have relatively frictionless transactions that work anywhere on the internet, PayPal. What it lacks is the ability to offer two-party transactions without counterparty risk, non-reversible transactions, and transactions without someone creating control. Otherwise, point is PayPal. And if we're asked to turn Bitcoin into PayPal in order to be compliant, then I'm sorry, screw being compliant.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com. More than 300,000 users and counting trust blockchain.info. It's a Bitcoin wallet service and a wealth of Bitcoin information, and is completely free to use. With a blockchain.info wallet, you'll get the convenience of a web wallet and the security of a desktop client. Blockchain.info is also a block explorer. You can use it to see Bitcoin transactions in real time, check the balance of any Bitcoin address, and view many handy Bitcoin charts, all for free. See what they have to offer today at blockchain.info.
So completing our interview series here at the Cryptocurrency Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, today we're joined by Becky and Austin Craig, who are the Life on Bitcoin couple and who are now two months? Mm-hmm. 2 months into their 3-month experiment of living completely on Bitcoin. So how's that going?
It's going better. It's going really well. When we started this out, we thought maybe we were going to be starving and destitute and perpetually frustrated, just trying to get the basics taken care of. But the scenario has played out kind of best case. We were hoping to be able to push the outer limits of what's possible using Bitcoin, and it turns out a lot more is possible than we originally thought. So our basic bare essentials of food, rent, gas, groceries, insurance got taken care of within the first month or so of our experiment, and now we're kind of pushing the outer limits. What else can we do? And it's been interesting to see what works and what doesn't, and why.
So backing up a second, this is a project that I think has a lot of emotion tied into it for a lot of people in the community, because it's one of those things that's viewed as a milestone for legitimacy, a milestone for utility, right? Because what use is a currency, just like a language, if you're the only one that speaks it? So, or the only one that performs commerce in it. So what led you to this project, and why was now the time that it was appropriate to do it?
I have been interested in Bitcoin for a couple years, have been reading about it, been interested in it. I have a chat log with a buddy of mine from 2 years ago where I'm asking him, hey, do you know anything about Bitcoin mining? I want to build a miner. And this is a friend of mine who's much more technically capable, who said, well, good luck, man, because I couldn't figure it out, and maybe you'll make more headway. And I immediately gave up the notion of building a miner at that point, because I said, if my buddy Rob can't do it, there's no chance I'll be able to figure this out. So I just continued to learn about it and to read about it and to really stay quite interested, but not really knowing how to engage with it, how to be involved, because I lacked the technical skill. When it spiked, when the value of Bitcoin spiked and we saw that bubble in spring of 2013, my interest kind of rekindled, got a lot hotter, and I thought, I got to do something with this. And in a discussion with a good friend of mine, we kind of had the idea strike, saying, what if you lived on Bitcoin? What if you did it for, kind of a longer period of time, months even? And I was engaged. We were planning on getting married in July, and this whole narrative emerged where, you know what, let's live on Bitcoin. Let's make a documentary film about it. This could be something, this could be really good. There's a solid concept here that we could run with.
Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, because of all of those various technical expertise that it ties together, actually tends to have a mostly male audience. And so, Becky, I'm interested in how this has been from your perspective, and if you think that there's any difference whatsoever being a female in the Bitcoin space relative to being a male.
I think that would depend on the female. I don't know. I'm outnumbered most of the time, and that's fine. I expected that. When Austin and I were dating, he asked me, it was around the time Bitcoin started to get a lot of press, and I think it was when it was spiking up to like the $200 range. Austin said, hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? And I said, no. And so he started telling me about it. And as soon as he started talking about mining Bitcoin, I was like, what? Stop talking. What is this? And it made no sense, and it blew my mind. And so I, from that point on, eased into it a little bit. Kind of would read articles here and there as I saw them kind of pop up in my news feed. And then he approached me about this project, and I don't know, I just felt like it seemed important enough thing that it's something I wanted to learn more about. Learning it really in a hands-on way that's how I tend to live my life. I like baptizing myself by fire, I guess. So I felt like it was an exciting thing to just jump in and learn and try. And if I could do it with Austin by my side, then it was much more navigable. So
conventionally speaking, do you consider yourself early adopters?
I am, which is funny because I'm not terribly technically capable. I am not an engineer or a programmer, so I'm really just diving in and messing things up pretty quickly.
Because it's cool.
Yeah, it's so cool, and I'm somebody who likes to look at the potential of a new product or a platform or a product category or any new system. I say, oh, this could be so many different wonderful things and could solve so many problems. And I understood that about Bitcoin, but really this was the way we could engage with it in a way that I felt like could contribute to what was going on with Bitcoin, and that I could actually bring something to the table and interface with it. My experience and background is in video production and marketing. And so this film, I can't write software, I can't write code, I can't really have a technical discussion with you, but I can talk to people and I can make some video about this, and I can hopefully present us on camera in a way that's palatable and interesting and makes sense. So this was our hope and aim to A, learn about it ourselves, and B, hopefully bring some education to folks who might otherwise not be interested in a technical, cryptographic, security, libertarian, political, socioeconomic, philosophical, complicated issue.
Austin, your background and the way that you sort of carry yourself, not to be that guy, but reminds me a lot of me. I think that it's interesting because the timing that you guys really started thinking hard about this project is pretty similar to the timing that I started this show. And I think that there was a turning point that we hit there where that price went up, and it wasn't that it went up, it was that it went up after the year before. For me at least, it had gone down so much, and it had been so bad and so depressing, and everybody thought it was going to be over, but it wasn't. And so the fact that it went up again was like a signal to me, like a blinking beacon saying this is something that is important and that for whatever reason seems to be working. And then I looked at the community and I said, okay, the one major problem that they have here, one of the major problems that I can actually do something about was that the people who are able to explain this aren't able to explain this because yes, they have the technical knowledge, but they aren't able to articulate it in a way that is actually appreciable by people who don't have that technical knowledge. So it sounds like that was a really similar to your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd spent, and honestly, this is not just self-deprecating. I really don't understand it on a technical level. If you start talking to me about the blockchain and blocks and hashing, I hear the terminology a lot, but I honestly cannot tell you what all those things mean. I understand it like I understand my television. I grab the remote and I turn it on, and I know how to change channels and change the volume, and I know how to like make it record some things if I learn that function. But I can't tell you the physics or the mechanics of it. Bitcoin is the same way, but I understand by virtue of how it operates, there's huge potential here. And that was enough to get me really interested, really excited, and to want to engage with the subject matter. But it's not ever going to take off as a currency. It's not ever going to go anywhere. It's not ever going to become what the potential offers if it doesn't move beyond that niche technical community. And so that is where we hoped to engage. And hopefully people come to the documentary maybe interested to see the story of a young couple struggling in this crazy experiment. But we want people to walk away saying, oh, and now I also happen to understand this complex issue that actually touches on my life in a lot of ways.
You guys did a Kickstarter campaign. You successfully funded. What did you guys wind up with?
Just under $73,000 on Kickstarter.
Okay, and that was to pay for the documentary crew.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so your work is actually paying you now in Bitcoin. Isn't that right, Austin?
Yeah, I do a lot of freelance video work, a fair amount of acting and voiceover, but I have one staple client who's really built my career over the last few years. I'm the spokesperson for this one company, so I'm in their videos, I'm in their commercials, I do voiceovers, and they were very supportive of the project. And after just really some brief discussion, they agreed they would pay in Bitcoin, and they've been wonderful. They've set up a Coinbase account, and that's how they're doing the operation. But it's been really great to. Honestly, I have not had to touch US dollars through this experiment, which is wonderful because we had a lot of people really skeptical about what we were doing, saying, oh, they're definitely going to cheat. And I've been surprised how many of our personal friends and acquaintances are like, so be honest, really.
You guys have cheated a couple of times.
You're like spending
right?
money on nights and weekends, right? Like when the cameras are off, we're like, no, we swear we are not using any US dollars. And so the fact that we can do this without ever touching dollars in a lot of ways has been great. Mm-hmm. I've been lucky in that regard. Becky has a job that's still paying her in US dollars, but that gets converted to Bitcoin right away.
2 months into the project, you guys have conquered a lot of hurdles that were in place. You're able to eat. You're able to do a variety of things. What worked versus what didn't work?
What worked for us really, and what makes me nervous about our upcoming trip, is that we were really able to talk to people about it, especially if we had an existing relationship with them. Not necessarily a friendship, but if I've had an existing professional relationship with somebody, they've been much more interested in hearing what I have to say. Like the guy that does my hair, for instance, is not a guy who would ever consider Bitcoin or be interested in it and its implications, but I've been going to him for several years. So I asked him if he would accept Bitcoin for me in Austin, and he agreed. And I think we've sort of the easiest converts we've had are the people that know us and the people that trust us and the people that are interested in contributing to the community. So kind of the local tie-in is what's been helpful and what's been good for us.
So the people have been a major part of this.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. And what hasn't worked is when we go to any kind of corporate anything. Because they just say, my supervisor's not here, or you'd have to take that up with corporate, and that's just kiss of death. Like, if someone says, oh, you need to talk to our corporate offices, then we just are like, hey, and we don't. Because we can't, and it's not... people aren't ready for it at that level.
Well, there's nothing in it for them, it seems like.
No, not at all.
We've tried to chase it down a couple times where we call corporate offices, and if we finally get through the phone tree and get to a human being, then we explain what we're doing, and that person has no interest in pursuing the conversation, much less considering our proposition.
I get my car insurance through Geico, and so I called them and asked them about it, and the girl was super cool and really helpful. She's like, yeah, this sounds like a really cool thing. She's like, unfortunately, it would have to go to our corporate offices, and to me, corporate is really synonymous with like sluggish movements, and she's like, it would take a year for them to even like talk about it. So, just that environment isn't conducive to like fast adaptation of much.
Whereas when we've walked into mom and pop shops, small operations where the person at the register is also the business owner who has the authority to make that decision, we can have a 5-minute conversation and we'll say, okay, that sounds cool.
And then they can implement it themselves. And I think as more and more of that starts to happen, in a community, if a larger corporation is losing business because mom and pops are taking Bitcoin and customers are starting to pay with Bitcoin, then there's the incentive for that corporation to start taking Bitcoin. But what that means is people need to have it. People need to have Bitcoin wallets and then want to spend it at these places. So that needs to happen before I think we would really see any corporations starting to adopt it.
So now you two are paying for everything in Bitcoin, and so generally, when I talk to people about selling things for Bitcoin or buying things for Bitcoin, the concept of a discount for the future value of Bitcoin really often comes into play. So has anyone offered you a discount for paying with Bitcoin, or is it just like, okay, we'll accept this and that is the
sort
improvement?
Of the favor?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, we haven't gotten any discounts for accepting Bitcoin. We have had to offer a premium. so really the opposite.
Yeah.
Anyone who's not comfortable with it, who doesn't understand it, somehow offering them more of what they don't understand has made them accept it, which is weird. But our landlord, for instance, he was not budging, and he even wanted to. He was like, "Well, it's just 3 months. Like, I'll just have you guys pay me for 3 months when we're done." And we really wanted to pay him in Bitcoin. We really wanted that to be something that happened in this experiment. So we said, well, like, what if we paid you an extra 10%? And then he was like, okay. So it perked right up. But
he just did not want to be hassled.
Yeah.
You know, accepting Bitcoin meant he had to go through, even if it was a simple step, he had to go through additional steps, setting up a wallet, or in his case, setting up a Coinbase account, which is very simple, but it's just not something that he cared about. It wasn't relevant to him and his business. So we said, listen, it's important to us. It's so important to us. We will pay you additional. We'll mow the lawn even. So now we are mowing the lawn, paying 110% rent. And that was worth it for him to go set up a Coinbase account.
Such a good deal.
And he already had great tenants. So
yeah, he got a good deal. He'll realize that one day. What I'm really hoping is, because like some of these people, we went to the farmers market in Salt Lake and bought some just various things with Bitcoin. And what I really would love, and I don't think we would ever hear back from these people, but I would love it if like the guy we bought ice cream from checked it one day 5 years from now and was like, what?
yeah,
I just made like $100 and something on one ice cream cone. I think
that I
would be
sold
rad.
5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that would be really funny. It's quite
fairly likely to happen because
Yeah.
we're trying to pay people. You know, with Coinbase, it's really easy to walk up to somebody and say, hey, I'm going to send you money online. What's your email address?
Yeah.
They'll get the notification that funds have been sent their way. And if they don't immediately convert that to US dollars, it'll stay there and continue to accrue value as Bitcoin rises. So not unlikely that scenario can play out where years from now, or even months from now, somebody looks at it and it's gained value and they realize, hey, wait a second, this might be something I could be interested in.
So is that the common method that you've been approaching people with, was Coinbase accounts? Because I had thought that you guys were BitPay integrators.
We've had some businesses, the food truck that we have been eating a lot at, they integrated BitPay.
Okay.
Some of the other, and my hairstylist as well integrated BitPay. So
And Black Sheep Cafe is
Sheep
another
Cafe,
place
yeah.
that we've gone to. Businesses that we're going to be returning to, they're going to have an ongoing account that we want them to be able to continue to accept Bitcoin on an ongoing basis, and they understand that. We say, listen, one of these processors that you can go to is BitPay. Here's how to do it. It's very simple. We'll come back in a couple days and walk you through it.
yeah.
Coinbase we used especially for a one-on-one transaction with somebody who hasn't previously heard of Bitcoin, dealt with it, and we really need to pay them right then.
Yeah.
That's an easy way to say, I'm going to
That's
send
true.
you money
There is
online.
lead time with BitPay.
Yeah,
Yeah, they have
and
to
that's what I
register.
said when I was working with the dentist. I just had my teeth. I just had a couple cavities fixed right before we came. So as I was explaining Bitcoin to him and how he could take payments, I was like, really, there's one of two ways. Like, I feel like Coinbase is easy to start with. There's ease of use there, and it's a quick setup, but it takes time to have the Bitcoins, converted to US dollars. Like, so it would take him, it's going to take you a few days to get Bitcoin to US dollars. BitPay, that process is a little more instant, but the beginning of it is a little longer, so I kind of explained to him that give and take and said, like, BitPay is going to take a few days to set up, but then the conversion will be instant. Coinbase, the setup is instant, and then the conversion's not as quick. So it kind of just depends on the person and what we need to do, what they need to do.
One of the things I wondered is, have you had any contacts with people who take the other side of the coin, right? So you guys are going around convincing people to accept Bitcoin, but you have the same problem of those Bitcoins not being easily convertible back to dollars for people who want. So have you talked to anybody or worked with anybody locally who is willing to buy Bitcoins from these merchants that you're giving Bitcoins to, so that you can simplify that?
One thing that we did is we did a BitMob a week or two ago, where this one restaurant agreed to accept Bitcoin. They were wonderful. We walked in and pitched the idea to them, and they immediately were like, "Oh yeah, we've been thinking about accepting Bitcoin. We've been reading a lot about it. We were probably going to go with BitPay." And it's like, good heavens, you're light years ahead of everybody else. Mm-hmm. But they set it up, and we came back a week later with a couple dozen local Bitcoin enthusiasts. We all paid in Bitcoin. And I feel like that kind of activity is going to drive it forward, because if literally we're the only ones paying in Bitcoin, it's not going to be anything of interest to local merchants.
Right.
So we've been focusing on getting merchants to accept it, but we also need to start driving forward actual community usage.
Do you think that BitMobs are a good way to accomplish that goal?
Absolutely.
Totally.
I think it's a fantastic idea, because it's something you can do in your own community without having like formal organization, without having... It's something that everybody can contribute to in a meaningful way just by buying dinner. Yeah. You know, it'll be fun. It actually is effective. There's no drawbacks, I feel like, to the BitMob.
Bitcoin meetups are happening all over the place. Wherever there's a Bitcoin community, there are Bitcoin meetups. So why not meet up at a restaurant and then put those Bitcoins to use and get them into your local economy? It makes total sense.
So far, again, putting you on the spot here, what do you think is the oddest experience you've had in this journey?
We've had a couple. On our first day, when we got back from our honeymoon, so we started when we landed in Salt Lake International Airport back from our honeymoon, and we tried to convince a cab. No cabs were interested. We went to the train station and convinced one guy to accept half Bitcoin Casasius coin in exchange for buying our train fare back from the airport. And on the train, we started calling cab companies to take us from the train station to our house. And some of them were not interested in talking. Some of them were intrigued. One person who answered the phone at this cab company started reprimanding me, saying like, "What do you mean you don't have credit cards? And no cash? How do you expect to pay people? Oh, you're going to pay with internet money that people have never heard of. That doesn't sound very wise, does it?" It was like, suddenly I had called up my disappointed grandmother, telling me that I needed to live more responsibly. It was a really odd conversation to be having, and I was like, I understand, thank you for the advice. Can we get a cab? Will that work for you? It's also been funny sometimes when we approach people. You know, you think that Bitcoin has a type, but I have been really surprised sometimes about who knows what it is and who has no idea. This little old lady at a local grocery store said, "Oh yeah, I know what Bitcoin is." And I didn't believe her at first. I thought she must be confused.
No, you're confused, ma'am.
Like, "We are not PayPal, ma'am. We're talking about Bitcoin." She's like, "I know what Bitcoin is." I was like, "Oh, okay." And she wasn't kidding. She explained it to me. She really did understand what Bitcoin was. So there's been not huge game changers, but just those kinds of interactions are really intriguing to me, really eye-opening, that like, well, people of all kinds can interact with this, and it's interesting to see the different takes that people have on Bitcoin, because the opinions are just as diverse as the number of different people you talk to.
For me, the weirdness has come when anytime we interact publicly, like on Facebook or with our friends, it surprised me how many people think the joke of, "Oh, well, can you pay for that in Bitcoin?" is funny. Because it's not funny anymore, and we hear it every day now.
Yeah, we've been hearing that like, every day for months.
If we had a Bitcoin for every person that said that.
Can you pay for it with Bitcoin?
Yeah.
First time I've heard that one.
Yeah.
So, looking forward here, so you're on month 2 of a 3-month experiment. You guys are getting ready for a trip out of the country.
Yeah.
And away from the warmth of locals who you know, and moving into so what does that trip look like, and what are you hoping to accomplish with it?
That trip is looking scary.
Yeah, I started to have a mild panic attack when I really started thinking about the trip. But what that trip is looking like to me is an opportunity to really interact with people that we don't know and that aren't from our community. People in the Bitcoin community, people that have no idea what it is, really interacting with them about what we're doing and why, and introducing people to Bitcoin. I want to be in Kansas and at a gas station and talking to somebody like, this is what Bitcoin is, explaining it as best as we can while trying to get gas,
It'll be, I think, the most intriguing part of the documentary. Time-wise, it's just It's less than 1/3 of our entire life on Bitcoin, but I think for the purposes of the documentary, there's going to be a lot of on-camera time here from the trip, because that's where real interesting exchanges are going to happen. In our own community, we have kind of the protection of an environment that we're familiar with, people who are familiar with us, trusted relationships, a knowledge of which establishments are more likely than others to accept Bitcoin. With the trip that we're taking, we're not going to be in one place for much longer than a couple days at any point. So it's going to be, what can we accomplish right here on the spot? What's going to be the most effective way to get what we need and to evangelize Bitcoin? Because that's how we're going to survive. We're planning as much ahead of time as we think is necessary for us to not starve or be absolutely destitute. Because
for instance, we're bringing a tent.
Yeah. And if we miss a flight, I have no idea what plan B is. So if we somehow don't make it to the airport on time to get to Stockholm from New York, I don't know how we make up for that, but there's enough planning ahead that we know we can hit those critical junctures, but we're leaving a lot of it open so that we can just continue to have these kind of serendipitous interactions.
So what is the itinerary look like? Which countries are you going to, and why did you pick those?
The places we chose are places that reached out to us. So we said in our Kickstarter video that we wanted to see if we could do a cross-country road trip. So we're driving across the country. We're starting out in Utah, driving to New York. New York has a lot of Bitcoin activity there, and it's literally across the country. So driving to New York and then flying to Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm is home to KNC Miner, one of the companies that's making these new ASIC miners, and KNC reached out to us during crowdfunding, and they were really excited about what we were doing. They've actually been a huge support to the project. Honestly, I don't think a lot of our video production would be possible without their support. But we're going out there to see their operation and to hear their story, because from what I can gather, they have a pretty fascinating story about how they pulled all this together to make these miners in such a short amount of time. From there, we're flying to Berlin, going to the Kreuzberg neighborhood, where there's a lot of Bitcoin activity there as well, discussing how that developed and what they foresee with Bitcoin, and then flying to Singapore. Singapore is a global financial hub. We had people from the community there reach out to us saying, come to Singapore, see what investment bankers think of Bitcoin. That also gives us the opportunity to finish our trip by literally going around the globe, by flying back home to Provo, Utah, and having circled the globe on Bitcoin, which, I'm a marketer, that's a pretty good headline. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good hook. And that's honestly, we want to see how far we can take Bitcoin. I don't know how much further we could go. We've literally, at that point, fingers crossed, hoping that we get there, we will have circled the globe, showing that a lot more is possible with Bitcoin than we might have originally imagined.
So how did you wind up solving, you mentioned that some of the toughest ones to solve were the corporate ones, and that mostly you just weren't able to get through that wall. Did you wind up partnering with a travel agency, or how did the planes happen?
The planes were tricky. We reached out to a handful of places, but the way it ended up working is we have worked with Simply Travel Online, a company out of Germany that was considering accepting Bitcoin, heard about our project, got in touch with us and said, hey, listen, I've been thinking about it. Let's accept Bitcoin, and you guys can be our first purchase. So they've set up their site now to accept Bitcoin, and if you go to simplytravelonline.com, you can book a hotel. I think they have over 300,000 hotels available through their network, payable in Bitcoin, that they'll take care of. So we're getting flights through them, and are we booking hotels? I don't think we're booking a lot of hotels.
We're booking hotels through Simply Travel and through Nine Flats.
That's right. We're doing Simply Travel and Nine Flats. These companies, Nine Flats is kind of an Airbnb competitor. They already accepted Bitcoin. When we started this, it wasn't even any kind of partnership or collaboration. We didn't have to do outreach there. That was just available. So it's been interesting to explore what was already available and what was kind of on the cusp, and can we bring you along and help you get over the edge on this one and start accepting Bitcoin.
So you guys are headed out. When is the road trip to New York start?
In 6 days.
In 6 days. So you're flying back from Atlanta.
That makes me want to cry.
Driving to New York.
Cry. Yeah, driving to New York.
Okay. The ultimate end product here, besides the social experiment you're obviously conducting, is going to be this feature-length film, right? Mm-hmm. So is it going to see any sort of release, or is this going to be a release onto the internet sort of thing, or what's the plan?
Ultimately, it will certainly be available on the internet. I don't think it wouldn't be in the spirit of the project if it was like only available in theaters and DVD. Like, it makes sense for us to put it online. It makes sense for us to have it available in Bitcoin. But we also want this project to reach as many people as possible, not just the Bitcoin community. Obviously, we want it to appeal there, and people in the Bitcoin community will see it, be interested, and probably check out the film. I'm a fan of Bitcoin. I really like Bitcoin. Even as difficult as the project has been at times, I think it's really interesting and has such huge potential. That opinion has not changed, and I want more and more people to learn about it. I feel like the way that can happen is by mainstream distribution. We want to get it, hopefully, to a theatrical release. We're going to try to take it to some film festivals. All the details here are still being worked out because we're still in primary production and filming on the film, but looking at film festivals, looking at theatrical release if we can, and then Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, iTunes, etc.
I guess there are more venues for distribution now than there certainly were a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that we're going to get it out into the whole of the world one way or another. It's not going to be a niche thing.
Well, my suggestion to you is when you do release it on YouTube or some other free media, make sure that you put a QR code that has the Bitcoin address embedded right there on the video, because that definitely is something that could work, especially with a feature-length thing. I think that if you giving something away like that really has value, I think that would be a very interesting experiment. I'd be interested to hear how that goes. So when should we expect to be able to see this? I mean, I understand that it's still in production, but do you have a timeline?
Fingers crossed. We hope to have some form of distribution, be that theatrical or online. We want the film to be done by next spring, maybe late next spring. The film festival circuit is going to be tricky for us. This is, I've worked in video production, but this is the first feature-length film that we've worked on. So that was not something we had scheduled out and really couldn't have changed the schedule for, because we were already planning on getting married. This is going to be the first 90 days of our post-honeymoon married life. So the timing was not changing on that. So there might be a delay in release because of the film festival circuit, but we're hoping to have the film finished, cut, done by late next spring, and maybe we'll be distributing right away at that point. But schedule is still very fluid.
Well, Becky and Austin, I think that I didn't really know what to expect from this interview, because again, it's like a, I don't know. I was fairly skeptical about it at first too, and I didn't think that there was too much to talk about, but you guys are really doing some interesting work. I think that this is a really interesting exercise, and I think it's very important that that this be done, and that's interesting because again, I didn't really think that was true maybe 2 months ago. So congratulations on your marriage, congratulations on your project. I really look forward to seeing the end result.
Thank you.
Have a good luck in Europe.
we might need the luck, yeah. So thank you, Adam. We really appreciate it.
So that's all we have time for on this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. We'll catch you next time.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. Hi, Stephanie here. Would you like to turn your book into an enthralling audiobook? Need a persuasive commercial to promote your company? How about a narrator for your explainer video? Here's where I can help. I'm a freelance voiceover artist, and since 2009, I've lent my voice to dozens of audio projects. To hear some examples of my work, check out my website, smvoice.info. If you like what you hear, I'd love to be the voice of your next project. Get in touch at smvoice.info.
Hear ye, hear ye! The dread pirate Roberts has been captured and is in the brig. He'll be walking the plank soon. So Silk Road shut down, and every gloating media puppet in the world went out and wrote the sensationalist article, Silk Road is down, Bitcoin is dead. We told you so. And of course, within a week, they were all proven wrong, after Bitcoin recovered to the exact same price it was before the capture. Turns out, Silk Road wasn't a big deal for Bitcoin, as factually shown by the price deviation. If a price can recover from that kind of drop within 72 hours with barely a blimp, that means it wasn't really dependent on Silk Road in the first place. So Silk Road really didn't make a big impact on Bitcoin. So what will be the effect of the shutdown of the Silk Road? What do you guys think?
I think there's an effect on Bitcoin, the Streisand effect, which is when you try to ban something or say it's bad, people get curious and say, ooh, what's that? I want to learn about Bitcoin. And, there was a small decrease in Bitcoin price for a few minutes. I managed to snag some at the low. I'm very proud of that.
I bought in at 85. Yay!
Woohoo! Cheap Bitcoins for a few minutes if you can get them. But then they went right back up within a couple of hours. And now they're actually higher than they were before the Silk Road was shut down. And there are more online drug marketplaces popping up. So I don't think the FBI has succeeded in winning the war on drugs. It seems like they kind of just cut off the head of a hydra and 8 million more just spin to place, and more people are interested in Bitcoin. Maybe that's because the war on drugs is a failure?
The Silk Road thing was interesting. It was the price was down for a little bit longer than that. I also bought, although it was at 110, not 80. Good job getting below 100. I think really what we're seeing here is that people respond emotionally before they respond in a way that makes sense. And so here, if the thought had been that Silk Road was a thing in your mind that was supporting the price of Bitcoin, then there you go. You would have been one of the ones selling, thinking that this would have been, the end of it all, or at least the end for right now. And then, we get through it and come out the other side of it, and it's obviously very different than that.
Well, it certainly didn't help that far too many media organizations decided that Schadenfreude was the right approach, and just gleefully mean and nasty reporting, of course completely fact-free, was the theme of the day. And I was not surprised by that, but as Stephanie says, it's the Streisand effect, right? Whatever the hell you want about Bitcoin, just spell it right. And guess what? They did. And 3 months from now, that wave of publicity that hit every single national newspaper and TV station around the world is going to turn Bitcoin into a $250 currency. Simple as that.
We don't know so much about what's happening with this Silk Road bust, right? We don't even know if this is something that actually happened. It's sort of weird, but if you look into how this news broke, it wasn't through FBI sources. It wasn't, in the past, we've pulled stuff from like DEA lists, where they have releases that go up all the time. It didn't come through any official sources whatsoever, because it happened just days after the U.S. federal government, quote, shut down. And so one of the things they stopped doing with that is they took down as many of them as they could, and they stopped maintaining the other ones of all their websites. The only place we've actually seen these affidavits talking about the charges filed and the arrests are actually through a couple of, scanned copies that made their way onto the internet, one of which through a berkeley.edu portal, and one of them popped up on Scribd, I think. But it's not like we're getting these from official sources, and I don't think we've seen the government actually acknowledge that this happened. So are we sure that this happened?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, really. Not only do we not know it's happened, but in fact, a lot of the basic facts of the case seem rather strange. Now, anybody who's been following the Silk Road for the last several years has probably heard repeatedly that the Silk Road has changed hands, and that the Dread Pirate Roberts isn't the same Dread Pirate Roberts who made Silk Road in the first place, but actually the third or fourth owner in a long chain of owners. Now, if you look at the affidavits, they hint that this person is actually the same Dread Pirate Roberts who started Silk Road and has held it in one continuous chain of ownership. That doesn't really rhyme. But, at the end of the day, we won't know the truth. That's the simple answer. This is a drug case, and when drug cases happen in the US, truth goes out the window. As you've noticed in any of the coverage of this, the one word that you wouldn't see is the word allegedly. That's only afforded to people with power. And so at the moment, allegedly, they've arrested someone who allegedly goes by Dread Pirate Roberts. You could see this. The coverage was really obnoxious. NPR, a liberal radio station, was saying Lawrence was arrested and disclaimed any use of aliases. He also goes by the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. Hey, hang on a second. Didn't you just say he disclaimed everything? Didn't you need a bit of an allegedly in that sentence? So you see, this is what's happening. I think the ultimate outcome of Silk Road was that this was an attempt to smear Bitcoin and an attempt to end the war on drugs. So now tens of thousands of people have to go back to street corners where they can get shot to buy their drugs. Great job, FBI. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's really not about safety. And the war on drugs is a failure. It hasn't stopped anyone from doing drugs. if this really happened, then a couple of people got busted. At the end of the day, people are still buying drugs with Bitcoins, and they're still buying a hell of a lot of drugs with cash.
The war on some drugs is an unqualified success. It has led to increases in purity and decreases in prices across all drug categories across the entire planet. And it's made law enforcement probably one of the most lucrative state operations across the country through asset forfeiture laws. Basically, it's a Ponzi scheme.
You know, one of the interesting things about these like hidden sites and these hidden illicit markets, once you've built up reputation in them, like so Silk Road has been around, I think 2-3 years. Over that amount of time, it became a very well-respected and trusted place to do business. And now that stands in contrast because when you're running websites like this, you go out of your way and do everything possible to hide your identity. The whole reason for having these hidden services is so that you don't have to disclose your identity. Ulrich was charged not necessarily with the sale of drugs, even though I saw him repeatedly referred to as a drug kingpin. He was actually charged with conspiracy to distribute and a couple of these other things because he wasn't actually touching any of the product. He was creating a market. And then through the trust that that community had in him, he was able to essentially share that trust out. He was the common, or Silk Road was the common factor tying it all together. Now, one of the things that occurred to me when this went down is that cuts both ways. And just as now you no longer have that trusted hub, it's not like that demand has gone away. So if you're a person who uses these services, you'll really want to be careful in finding your next one, because ones that have gone up, you know, in the interim or in the months beforehand, I'd be looking at them real hard as honeypots and saying, you know, who is the person actually running this business? Who is the person actually doing that? Because the timing is suspect.
If you want to get a successful honeypot, you'd need to have some kind of seized stash of Bitcoin so you can run sting operations.
Oh, wait.
Wait.
Right.
I think a lot of people have wondered about Atlantis, you know, because that sprung up a couple of months ago, kind of around the same time frame that the FBI said they had copied the server of the Silk Road, you know, and then it curiously shut down a couple of weeks before Silk Road did. So what was going on there? What was the connection?
I don't know if we'll ever know with something like that. I mean, there are lots of reasons to start one of these things up, and I think that there are arguably even more reasons to shut one of these things down, especially if you think that you've somehow leaked your identity in doing so. Ultimately, these illicit markets are going to be around, but they're going to get to be such a small part of the overall cryptocurrency ecosystem that I think we're going to stop paying attention to them entirely. I mean, I think that this is probably only the first or second time that we've ever even talked about Silk Road on Let's Talk Bitcoin. And again, it's because while 2 years ago, you know, these might have been really, really core features of the economy for the people who are using it, right now, that's just not the case.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. 2 years ago, if this had happened to Silk Road, it could have been a mortal wound for Bitcoin. A year ago, it would have been a bad wound for Bitcoin. And this time, it was barely a scratch. This is really an evolutionary process. Silk Road was just the latest in an attempt to make an online marketplace. This one had the advantage of a pseudonymous currency, and the next one's going to do it better. So all that the feds have achieved in this particular case is to create Fed-resistant strains of Silk Road as the very next step.
Hey guys, maybe the federal government will wage a war on Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin will become more popular and more ubiquitous all the time. It seems to happen with everything else, right? The war on terror, the war on drugs, war on poverty.
Well, we do seem to live in a bit of an upside-down society. I hope that there's a less adversarial future ahead of us, I have to say, because while, yeah, it can happen, at the same time, it's not going to be easier. It'll be much harder. And it'll be much harder for people to get involved. And it'll be much harder for legal businesses to get involved. I mean, this is the same reason why you don't see, you know, legal drug businesses that have a huge focus on health and a huge focus on, you know, the quality of their product and stuff like that, because lacking the legal reasons to do that, they're just not there. It's easier to go with the lowest common denominator. And so that's what you see in these markets. I don't want that to happen to Bitcoin. I don't want it to become an exploitative thing where the only people who are willing to sell you Bitcoin are criminals because only criminals are allowed to have them. That's a bad outcome for me.
Well, unfortunately, it seems like it's really, really difficult to have a legal business that sells or buys Bitcoin or both. I don't know if we're quite at the criminal stage yet, but certainly what happened, you know, getting ripped off with the counterfeit bills, it's a direction that Bitcoin could go in.
I think Bitcoin is going in the opposite direction. I think a lot of the first applications of Bitcoin were naturally the areas where you had the maximum friction in fiat currencies or through legal reasons. So cross-border transactions and illicit goods. But at the end of the day, listen, you're not going to have Bitcoin suddenly represent a market that's different from the market for other currencies. Drugs are the second important purchase in commodities in every country after food. It's as simple as that. Human societies place drugs second after food on their purchasing list. We see this in every society since the beginning of time. So, the war on drugs here is attempting to go against nature, but Bitcoin will reflect the cultural standard, and that involves drugs. It's always going to be easier to buy drugs with fiat, and fiat will always be the main funding mechanism for drugs.
There's another black market, I guess, industry, at least in the US. In some places of the world, it is not black market at all, that I just haven't heard much about in connection with Bitcoin, and that's the sex trade, prostitution, the oldest profession. Where's the online marketplace for prostitutes and Johns to meet and use Bitcoin to do some kind of a deal? I haven't heard of it. Do you think it's out there?
I've read a couple of Reddit posts about various things like that popping up, but it's not, and that's probably interesting. I wonder what it is about Bitcoin that's not particularly appealing to sex workers. My guess, it's control. Physical control of the currency is one of the main ways by which a pimp will control their sex workers, not allowing them to carry enough money to run away, for example. That's a classic scenario in prostitution. Usually the pimps will basically hold the money and not allow their sex workers to control it because they'll run away. So Bitcoin actually makes control of money harder, and it makes it easier for one of the sex workers to gather money and have it outside the control of their pimps.
So maybe it wouldn't be appealing to a pimp situation, but for a self-employed sex worker, it could be incredibly empowering, right? If they were able to have control of their own earnings and have an irreversible way, if the client has to pay in advance and Bitcoin transactions are irreversible, there's less chance for them to get ripped off, right? And then they have full control of their own money. So yeah, I kind of see an opportunity there, I guess, if somebody's in that profession, but curious why it hasn't got on yet.
I think because at the end of the day, pimps do provide a security service as much as that's horrible and everything, but they do provide a security service. And of course, a freelance sex worker, while they may be able to control their money, would lack that security. So that's part of the reason you don't see that.
Right. And again, something else to keep in mind is that we talk about Bitcoin like it's impossible to steal it, but that's actually actively not true, especially if you're talking about hot wallets on like a phone or something like that. I mean, I can see a solution where like you don't have the private keys on your phone, you just have the ability to receive money, and then it goes somewhere else that you're not carrying with you. But on my phone until fairly recently, I had an unlocked wallet that wasn't encrypted necessarily because I was, doing a lot of business with it fast, and it was much more convenient to have it like that. So, there are security precautions that you can take, but even then, getting someone to make you give them your password relative to stealing your wallet, it's actually not that much harder. So the issue is it has to be not possible to steal it.
There's a mnemonic used for multi-factor authentication, which is something to steal, something to chop off, and something to beat out of you.
What about other types of sex work besides just prostitution, like the ones that are sort of legal in the U.S., like dominatrixes, strippers, foot models, that kind of thing? There's an opportunity for them to use Bitcoin. They already have maybe some sort of security services available in the places where they work, or maybe they're self-employed and they've taken care of that themselves. Sometimes it seems to me probably the dominatrixes don't have to worry about that too much.
Yeah. But, I think that probably there are some circumstances where that makes sense, but the ones that seem to jump out to me are ones that are online. Because that's the real problem, is that there are already solutions to anonymous or pseudonymous person-to-person cash-like systems in real life. They're called cash. So I think that if you can take that same sort of thing and apply it to, like there's on Reddit, Gone Wild or something like that, where people give Bitcoin tips to people who take off their clothes. I don't really get into it, but the point is that for solutions like that, I can totally see that being applicable much more so than something happening in real life.
Hey, Bitcoin is empowering. And so if Bitcoin can empower anyone who chooses to use Bitcoin to be empowered, and that applies to any profession, any trade, any type of transaction. All I can tell you is that at least the counterfeit cash I got was in return for Bitcoin and not services. I mean, can you imagine how disappointed I would have been if I'd just been and
Thanks for listening to episode 52 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's show was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, Becky and Austin Craig. Additional editing was provided by Matthew Zipkin. On-location engineering by Crystal Levine, and music was provided by Jared Rubens. Video conference passes are now available for the Cryptocurrency Conference, which took place in Atlanta, Georgia on October 5th, with the introduction and keynote by Jeffrey Tucker and the first hour-long panel available for free. For nearly 6 hours of conference talks, lectures, and speakers, visit bitcoinvideopass.com.